Welcome to Scrimba's Learn Vue course. This is a beginner-friendly journey that will help you master the fundamentals of Vue.js. Whether you're new to JavaScript frameworks or looking to add Vue to your toolkit, this course is designed to get you up and running. In this course, you'll learn the basics of Vue, one of the more popular JavaScript frameworks for building user interfaces. Vue is known for its simplicity, flexibility, and performance, making it an excellent choice for both small projects and large-scale applications. As we learn about Vue from the ground up, we'll be building 6 Vue-powered projects that are perfect for practicing your newfound skills. By the end of the course, you'll have a solid foundation in Vue and the confidence to start building your own projects. We'll start with a simple Vue facts page, where we'll learn how to display dynamic data within what's called components. Then we'll create a page from Grammar's recipe book. This simple app lets users click between photos, ingredients, and instructions, all using data from external files. Next up is this animal shelter listing, where you'll learn to filter data by type and display dynamic descriptions. Our fourth project is a daily gratitude pad, where you build a real-time journaling app that timestamps and displays your entries throughout the day. Getting more advanced, we'll create a Pokédex application that pulls data from an external API, the perfect way to learn how Vue handles external data. And for our capstone project, you'll build Definition Detective, a word-guessing game that uses a dictionary API to display real definitions as part of the gameplay. Now, don't worry if some of these projects sound complex. We'll break everything down into manageable steps, and by the time you get to the project, you will have all the skills that you need. In Section 1, we're going to focus on getting started with Vue. We'll start by introducing Vue, what it is, and why we should learn it. You'll learn how to create your first Vue app using a CDN, turning a static web page into a dynamic one. Then we'll install Vue locally using Create Vue, the official Vue Project scaffolding tool, and you'll explore the anatomy of a Vue project. Now, before we go ahead, let's talk about prerequisites. Since this is a Vue course, it is important to have a basic understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Vue builds on these foundational technologies, so familiarity with them will help you get the most out of this course. I'm Rachel Johnson, and I'll be your instructor for this Learn Vue course. I'm a lifelong learner, passionate teacher, and a big believer in making learning accessible and fun. So let's dive into Vue together and build some amazing things. Let's start with a super important question. What is Vue? Well, Vue is a progressive JavaScript framework that makes building user interfaces and single-page applications a breeze. Created by Evan You in 2014, Vue has grown to be one of the more popular front-end frameworks in the world alongside React and Angular. In this course, we'll be focusing on Vue 3, which is the latest major version of the framework. At the time of this recording, the latest stable release version is 3.5.17. Now, Vue likely would have updated by the time you're learning, so there might be some slight differences between what you see here and what you encounter in the real world. But don't worry, if the changes are significant, we'll be sure to update your learning experience accordingly. So with so many other options out there, why should we learn Vue.js? Well, it isn't just another JavaScript framework, and the numbers really back this up. Stack Overflow's 2024 developer survey shows Vue as the 4th most popular front-end JavaScript framework with an impressive 60.2% admiration rating, which is just 2% below first place. The State of JavaScript 2024 report paints an even more compelling picture, with Vue ranking 2nd in usage, awareness, and developer positivity, and 3rd in interest and retention. And these rankings have either held steady or improved over the last few years. The open source community's enthusiasm for Vue is evident in its GitHub statistics, with over 208,000 stars and 33,000 forks. But it's not just independent developers who love Vue. Industry giants like Adobe, Nintendo, the Alibaba Group, along with popular services like Zoom, GitLab, Grammarly, Netlify, and Trustpilot all use Vue in their production environments. And perhaps the most telling is Vue's consistent growth in adoption. 5 to 6 million weekly downloads on NPM with steady year-over-year growth. These numbers aren't just statistics. They represent a thriving ecosystem and a framework that is here to stay. This means that learning Vue isn't just about picking up another tool. It's about investing in a skill that's increasingly valued in the job market and supported by a robust, growing community. Time to stop talking about Vue and start actually using it. In the next Scrim, we'll take our first hands-on steps with Vue by exploring some cool concepts and setting up a developer environment. Are you ready to start building? Let's jump into some code. Before we dive into setting up Vue locally or using build tools, we're going to start with something simple, which is using Vue via a CDN. This means we can include Vue in our project with a script tag in our HTML file. This will let us skip the setup process for now and jump straight into making those fingers busy. You'll see how easy it is to get started with Vue and how powerful it can be, even in its simplest form. If you're new to Scrimba, this editor is where the magic happens. You're able to see live code examples, pause me at any time, and edit the code directly to try things out yourself. When I present you with challenges, which I will throughout the entire course, the editor will pause automatically and let you have a go in your own time. If you're following along on another platform like YouTube, we'll talk about how to install Vue locally in a few scrims time so you can practice in the comfort of your own IDE. But for now, I invite you to hop on over here to scrimba.com to get your fingers busy with Vue. For our very first Vue app, I've put together a very basic HTML file. We'll include Vue via the CDN, and then use Vue to display a message on the page. This will give you a pretty good taste of Vue, and in the next scrim, you're going to give it a go yourself. To start using Vue, we're going to include the library using a CDN, and to do that, all we have to do is add a script tag in the head of our HTML file right here and specify the source location, just like any other CDN. And the best place to grab the CDN source URL directly is the official Vue documentation. Now, I've already copied this script tag, so I'm just going to pop it right here. And now once I've saved, we have access to all the features of Vue 3, and we can start using it directly in our application. Now, Vue works by attaching itself to a specific part of the HTML, usually a div, and then controlling what happens inside of that element. So first, we're going to wrap everything in the body tag inside of a div and give it an ID of app. So div with an ID of app. And then I will also close the div and then indent everything inside of it. Now let's have a look down here at the H1 where it says Hello World. We're going to use Vue to change out the world of Hello World to a name of our choice that we'll define using Vue. To prepare for that, I'm going to replace this world with this, curly brackets, name, and then closing curly brackets. And once we save, we can see that that has been reflected in the preview. Now notice the curly brackets. This is Vue's text interpolation syntax. We will get more into this later, but for now, just know that it will tell Vue to render the value of a name variable inside of the H1 tags. But what is name? Well, we're going to define that in our JavaScript. So in order to use JavaScript, we're going to open script blocks down here. And this is where we're going to start using Vue. I'm going to type up a bunch of code, but I will explain it as I go. So first is const create app and ref equal Vue. What's happening here is that I'm grabbing the create app and ref functions from Vue. These are functions that we will explore more of throughout the course, so don't worry too much about them right now. Just know that I'm essentially importing them so we can use them. Next up is create app, and then brackets, and then curly brackets. With this line, I'm using the create app function that we just imported right here to, you guessed it, create a Vue app instance. Everything inside of it defines how the app will behave. So inside the curly brackets, I'm going to start with a setup function. This function gets run the moment that our app loads, and this is where we'll define our data and logic. So let's add some data. Create a constant with the name of name, and here I'm going to type ref and then Rachel. Ref is something that we'll explore later, but for now, think of it as a Vue variable. Then we have to make sure we can access name from the HTML by returning it. So return name. And finally, down here at the closing bracket of our create app, we're going to add mount, and then we're going to specify something with an ID of app. Do you remember that div earlier up here? This is where it all connects up. Everything that we've done in this script block inside of this create app function will apply to the div with an ID of app. And once we save, we can see that our preview now shows hello Rachel rather than hello world. So what's happening behind the scenes? When the page loads, Vue takes over this div with an ID of app, and it replaces this name with the value of name, which we set and returned down here in our JavaScript. And just like that, you've learnt the very, very basics of Vue and how it can extend a standard HTML file. In the next scrim, you're going to take a static web page, just like this one, and turn it into a Vue app, just like what I did in this scrim. So I will see you there. Welcome to your first challenge of the course. This scrim was designed to give you a hands-on opportunity to apply what you've learnt in the last scrim. Here, I've put together a simple 404 page that has a few elements to it. There's a span with an emoji, a H1 with an error code, a P tag with some error text, and a button. I'd like you to have a go at getting this vanilla HTML page set up with Vue, and then use Vue to change the text content of these 4 elements. Now, while you can skip challenges here on Scrimba, I really encourage you to give it a good go. After all, the best way to learn anything is to do it. So here is your challenge. Turn this static 404 page into a Vue app using the CDN. Then make it your own by using a different emoji, status code, and text. To do that, I've split it up into 5 steps. First, you'll have to include the Vue CDN, and then you have to prep your HTML by wrapping everything in a div with an ID of app. And then in new script tags, you'll have to import the create app and ref Vue functions. Then create a Vue app instance and mount it. And finally, you'll have to create the 4 ref variables and use them to change the text content of the 4 elements, which is the span, the H1, the P, and the button. Now, if you need to, I have popped the exact syntax that you'll need over here in hint.md, but do try to give it a go on your own first. And remember, you can always refer back to previous scrims if you need a quick reference. Give it a go now, and I'll walk you through how I'll do it afterwards. Welcome back. How did you go? This is what I would have done. So first, we'll include Vue via the CDN, and I'm going to do it just before the closing head tag. And then I'll prep the HTML by wrapping the body content, which is all of this, inside of a div with an ID of app. So div with an ID of app. And we'll close that, and then also indent everything. Now we can swap out the static content for all 4 HTML elements and replace them with the dynamic content using those curly brackets. Instead of this hard-coded emoji, I'll pop in some curly brackets and replace it with the word emoji. And I'll do the same with this 404. Some curly brackets, and I'll call it status code. Moving down to the P tag, we'll replace this entire line with curly brackets, status message. And then instead of the buttons go back to safety, we'll replace it with curly brackets and button underscore text. And now we can see that the preview has changed. And it looks like this because we haven't actually created the app yet. So let's go and do that. Before the closing body tag, we're going to create our script block. Script. Inside the script block, let's import the relevant Vue functions. So const, we're going to import create app as well as ref from Vue. And then we'll create the Vue app instance and also mount it right now. So create app. We'll leave this blank for now. And on the other end, we're going to mount it to something with an ID of app. Now that we've created the app and also mounted it to the div with an ID of app, these emoji, status code, and status messages are now looking for the matching variable, which doesn't exist yet, and therefore it's showing nothing. So let's get those variables set up. Inside of the curly brackets, we're going to use the all-important setup function. Remember, the code in here gets run when the app starts. So inside of the setup function, we'll create the 4 variables, one for each of these elements that we've prepped earlier. So first, the emoji, making sure to use the ref function, and here I'll just use a monkey. Next is status code, and here let's just do 500. Next is the status message, and we'll do something super short. Server is sleeping. And finally, the button text. And here we'll just show my age, bye. And now to make sure that the HTML can access these variables, we will return them. So return emoji, status code, status message, and button text. Save, and there we go. Great job on that challenge. You've just taken a static web page and turned it into a dynamic Vue app by making parts of it reactive. That's a big step forward, and you should feel proud of what you've accomplished. Vue's reactivity system is powerful, and you're already starting to see how it can make your applications more dynamic and easier to manage. Now, I know this seems super simple at the moment, but trust me, Vue gets a lot more exciting very quickly. These first few scrims were just about getting your brain thinking the Vue way and getting your fingers busy with the basics. In the next scrim, we're going to leave the CDN behind and install Vue for real using npm. This is how most real-world Vue projects are set up, and it unlocks a whole new world of tools and features that will make your development process even smoother. So far, we've been using Vue via a CDN, which is a great way to get started quickly. But in most real-world Vue projects, Vue is installed locally using npm. And in this scrim, we're going to take that next step and install Vue locally using the official Vue project scaffolding tool, Create Vue. And we're going to do it right here in the Scrimba interactive editor. This handy command line tool does exactly what it says on the tin. It spins up a Vue project right where we want it. So here in the editor, I'm going to type npm create Vue at latest. Always include this at latest to make sure you're using the most up-to-date version of Create Vue. Without it, npm might actually resolve to a cached or outdated version. Under the hood, Create Vue leverages Vite, a fast and modern build tool to power both the development server and the production build. With Create Vue, we get a project pre-configured with Vite for an efficient and enjoyable development experience. If you want to learn more about Vite, we do have an Intro to Vite course right here on Scrimba. Back in the terminal, we'll say yes to installing Create Vue by entering Y. The command line will now ask us a few questions to set up the project the way we want it. First, it asks for a project name. This is pretty self-explanatory. What do you want to call your Vue project? Create Vue will then create a folder in the current directory with this name and spin up your project inside of it. We can also use just a dot here if we want the project to be scaffolded in the current directory. If we do this, we will have to supply a package name. So we're going to call this one My Vue Project, because I'm super imaginative. The remaining prompts are all about customizing the features and tools you want included in your project. Each option will either add packages or configure settings that extend the functionality of your project. We won't select any of these now, but I just wanted to show you how customizable Vue can be even from the setup process. We'll press Enter to move along, and we'll also get a chance to install any experimental features, which we won't at this stage. Once we've answered all the prompts, Create Vue will go ahead and scaffold the Vue project for us just like that. We can see that there are a bunch of files and folders that have appeared in our current directory, such as this package.json. We can see a pretty standard package.json here. We have the all-important Vue package listed, as well as Vite dependencies needed to get us running. We can even see up here in the scripts that Vite is used to power everything. Back to the terminal. Once the project was created, Create Vue left us some instructions in the terminal, which is npm install followed by npm run dev. So let's follow them. First, npm install or npm I. This installs any and all dependencies listed in package.json. Now this is actually what will install Vue itself and any extras that we may have specified. Now this may run for a little bit, so sit tight. And done. And now we can run the other one, which is npm run dev. Now this starts the development server, and we'll actually see Vue's starter project pop up in this preview window. And just like that, we have a Vue project set up and ready to go. In the next scrim, it's your turn to give it a go to try and set up a new Vue project. In the last scrim, I walked you through how to spin up a new Vue project, and in this scrim, you're going to give it a go yourself. This will probably be a quick scrim, but it will be a good opportunity for you to have a go rather than just watching me do it. So here is your challenge, which I've already put here in challenge.md. Use Create Vue to spin up a new Vue project, then install and run it. Now, if you choose to scaffold the project into the current directory, which we did in the last scrim, Create Vue will ask about removing everything in this directory in order to do that. Since all we have here is this challenge.md, feel free to say yes. This is how to do it. So down here in the terminal, we'll type npm create Vue at latest. For the project name, I'm going to put a dot because I want it to scaffold into this directory. The current directory is not empty. Remove existing files and continue. Yes, that is totally fine. The package name will be Vue Project. And I will choose to install none of the features and none of the experimental features either. Next up, I'm going to install with npm install, which might take a while. Once it's installed, we can run the app with npm run dev. And there we go. In the next scrim, we'll take a closer look at what Create Vue has spun up for us. We'll explore the project structure, dive into the files, and start understanding how everything fits together. But for now, take a moment to celebrate. You've just set up your first Vue project like a pro. Now that we've set up our Vue project using Create Vue, let's take a look at the project structure that it generated for us. Now, I do know this might seem like a lot to take in at first, but don't worry, we'll learn about everything in detail over the rest of the course. For now, just think of it as a quick tour of your Vue Project's anatomy. So first you'll notice that Create Vue has spun up a bunch of files and directories. We're going to go straight into the directory that you'll be spending most of your time in, which is this source folder. First, we have an assets folder, which, as you can imagine, would house your project's assets. Inside of it, we can see some CSS files as well as an SVG file. Pretty standard assets. And then we have this components folder, where our components will live. Now don't worry, components are just chunks of code that will make up your app's interface. We'll get into that concept real soon in the next section. And then moving down, we have app.vue. Now this is the heart of your application. It's the home of your Vue project. At a glance, we can see some JavaScript at the top between some script tags, we've got some HTML in the middle between some template tags, and then even some CSS down here inside of style tags. We will learn about this unique format very, very soon. And then we have main.js. This is a super simple JavaScript file that links our HTML to our Vue project. Some of the code here might ring a bell. Import create app from Vue, .mount id app. We saw this kind of logic a few scrims ago when we were using the Vue CDN. Well, in an installed Vue app, this is where that logic sits. Okay, let's come out of the source folder and into this index.html. This is the HTML file that gets served as the landing page of our website, just like any other index.html file. For the most part, you won't need to make any changes here. Let's have a look. Down here at the bottom, we have our script tag, which imports the main.js file. And just above that, we have our div with an ID of app. This is where your entire Vue app will be mounted. And then all the way up here, we have your public folder. This is where we'll put files that we want exposed to the public as is. For example, static assets like favicon files. Now let's step down here to these 4 files under configuration. These files make Vue work under the hood, and if you've worked with other frameworks or Node.js, they should look familiar. First, we have jsconfig.json. This file determines which files should be compiled when we build the project. Here, we can see that everything in the source folder is included, and anything in the node modules or dist folders are excluded, which is pretty standard. Then we have package.json and packagelock.json, which we've already talked about. They list dependencies like Vue and Vite, and developer tools, as well as any scripts that you'll need to run or build your project. And finally, we have vite.config.js. Now, this file contains config settings for Vite, which, as you may remember, is the build tool that powers your project. Here we can see that Vue and Vue dev tools have been imported and then applied as plugins for Vite. If we wanted to, for example, disable Vue dev tools at the moment, it's as easy as commenting that line out or deleting the line completely. Now, we are going to do that as we don't need Vue dev tools just yet. And then down here, we have what's called an alias, which we'll talk about later in the course. For the most part, you won't need to work too heavily with these config files, but it's good to know what they do and why they're here. Again, I know this might feel like a lot to take in. This is a fairly fleshed out starter project for a beginner, and it's natural to feel a little overwhelmed at first. But here's the good news. From now on, I'll only include the files that we need to focus on. That way, we can break things down step by step and build your understanding gradually. For now, just remember, source is where you'll spend most of your time building your app. App.vue is the main Vue file. And index.html is where the app will be mounted to your HTML via main.js. In the next scrim, we'll do a quick recap of everything we've covered in this section, from setting up Vue to exploring its anatomy. It's the perfect way to reinforce what you've learned and get ready for the exciting journey ahead. And that's it for this first section. Let's take a moment to recap what we've learned so far. We started by introducing Vue, what it is, and why we should learn and use it. Then we created our first Vue app using a CDN, turning a static HTML web page into a dynamic one. After that, we installed Vue locally using Create Vue and got a fully set up Vue project ready for development. And finally, we explored the anatomy of that project, breaking down its structure and understanding the purpose of files and folders in it. You've come a long way already, and you should be proud of what you've accomplished. You've gone from zero to having a fully functional Vue project set up and ready to build on. That's no small feat. And I just wanted to let you know that it's perfectly normal to feel a little overwhelmed at this stage. Vue is a powerful framework, and learning it takes time and practice. But here's the good news. You've already taken the hardest step, which is to get started. Every great developer started where you are right now, and the key to success is persistence. Keep practicing, keep experimenting, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how you learn and grow. In the next section, we're going to dive into the fundamentals of Vue. Think of this section as packing for your adventure, and the next section, you're going to go on it. Let's keep this momentum going, and I will see you in section 2. Hey there, and welcome to section 2. In this section, we're going to take your Vue skills to the next level. We'll build on what you've learned in the previous section and dive into some powerful Vue features that will make your apps more dynamic and modular. Here's what's on the menu for this section. First, you'll learn how to break your app into bite-sized, logical pieces with Vue Components. And then we'll discover how to simplify your import paths with the @alias. Next up, you'll learn about Vue's reactivity system, which goes hand in hand with Vue's template syntax. And finally, we'll look at how to use images and assets in Vue. For our project this section, we're going to build a very simple Vue Facts app. It's a one-pager that features the Vue logo and 3 facts about this awesome framework. We'll work on this project over 3 scrims, tackling a new concept in each one as we go. But between those scrims, we're going to learn about these features of Vue so we can use it. For each key concept that we'll cover, here is the learning process that we're going to follow. First, I'm going to introduce each concept in a simple and clear way so we can understand the theory. And then you'll see it in action, with me showing you the concept in context. And once we've done that, you'll put your understanding to the test by practicing with a challenge. And finally, we'll apply what you've learned into the Vue Facts app. This approach will help you build confidence while seeing how everything connects in a real project. By the end of the section, not only will you understand these concepts, but you'll also see how they work in a real project. Plus, you'll have a cool Vue Facts app to show off in your portfolio. So are you ready to level up your Vue skills? Let's get coding. We're going to kick off our fundamentals with the core feature of Vue, the Vue component. In Vue, everything starts with a component. It's a special file format that contains the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in one neat package. Let's see it in action. In this scrim, I've set up a fresh install of Vue using Create Vue. In the source folder, we've got app.vue and main.js, which is what actually mounts our Vue app to the HTML. We've also got main.css inside of our assets folder. Let's head inside app.vue, where most of our work will be done in. And here we have the default app.vue file that Create Vue scaffolded for us. Late in the last section, we had a very brief look at the contents here, and now it's time to really have a look. We can see that there are 3 blocks. There's the script section at the top, a template section in the middle, as well as a style section here at the bottom. To make it even easier to look at, let's get rid of all the content inside each of these blocks. What we have left is the skeleton of what's called a single file component. This structure, plus this .vue file extension, is a special file format that allows us to work on the template, logic, and styling of a Vue component in one file. The classic trio of HTML in the template, CSS in the styles, and JavaScript in the script section. Our core app.vue file is in itself a component. And that's why I said earlier that in Vue, everything starts with a component. This component. I'm going to drop in a bit of content. And then I'm going to run the app with npm install and npm run dev. Does this look familiar? It should. This is the one-pager that we played around back in the first section. I bet you probably recognize some of the code before I even ran the app. Back then, we used a plain HTML file and a CDN to get Vue working in our project. What you're seeing now is the exact same project, but implemented as a Vue component. To make the comparison cleaner, Here is what the CDN version's JavaScript look like. And down here is the JavaScript that we need for a Vue component. Do you notice how much cleaner and simpler the Vue component version is? In the HTML version, we had to use createApp and mount to initialize the Vue app. And then we had to wrap everything in the setup function and explicitly return each of the variables. But in the Vue component, all that boilerplate code is handled for us. Here we just have to import ref and then define our variables, which can then be used directly in the template section like you can see down here. All we have to do is include this setup keyword within the script block up here. Doing that essentially turns this entire block into this setup function. Now moving down to the template. This should look pretty much the same as the original HTML. We've taken everything from the body tag and popped it into the template section instead. This means we only have to concern ourselves with the content and none of the metadata that we would normally handle in the head section. And of course down here we have our style block. I had a lot of this in a styles.css file in the original. Every rule here is relevant to a HTML element up here in the template, and it's much easier for us to refer to while working in this component. If I wanted to change the styling of elements in the component, I can do it right here, rather than wading through a bunch of CSS in a CSS file. So essentially, everything that you see here in the preview is being determined by this single file component right here, this app.vue. And now, I'm going to challenge you to have a play. Your challenge is to make the copyright year down here dynamic and blue. In the script tag, you'll have to create a new ref to house a different year, and you can use the existing ones as a reference. In template, you'll have to change this static 2025 to render that new variable that you've created. And to do that, you can refer to how I've done them here. And in the style section, target the paragraph tag in the footer and make it blue. Give it a go now, and I'll see you on the other side. First, I created a new variable and I called it year. And then using the 2 above it as a reference, I followed it with ref function, and then I used 2014, which is the year that Vue was first publicly released. And then I'll render it in the template using the same syntax that I see for emoji and name. So instead of 2025, I put in these curly brackets, and inside of it, I referred to year, which is what we created up here. And then finally, down here in the styles, I targeted the footer's paragraph tag, and I made the color blue. And now when I save, we can see that the change has been made down here. So great work! You've just met the Vue single file component, or the .vue file. It bundles together your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all in one neat little package. Now if that's making you raise an eyebrow, hold on to that thought. We'll explore your concerns in the next Scrim. At this point, you're probably thinking, hang on, I thought we were supposed to keep HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in different files. And you'd be right. Separation of concerns is a key part of writing well-organized code. But let's talk about what that actually means in modern web development and how Vue approaches it. That way of separating file types made a lot of sense when websites were simpler. But as apps have gotten bigger and more dynamic, those language-based files don't always help anymore. In fact, they can get in the way. Imagine this diagram with a ton more files. Imagine how many arrows that would be. This is what Vue states on their own documentation. Separation of concerns is not equal to the separation of file types. In large, modern projects, splitting everything by language can actually create more confusion, not less. Vue takes a different approach. Instead of separating by language, it separates by purpose. The component itself is the concern. Each component does one thing. For example, a component renders, styles, and determines the interactivity of, let's say, a footer. And all the code it needs for that footer, the template, logic, and styles, is kept together. This makes your components easier to read, test, reuse, and update. So while it might look like we're mixing things up, we're actually making our code easier to work with in the long run. We're shifting from separating by file type to separating by units of functionality in our components. And that mindset is a key part of building large, maintainable Vue applications. In the next Scrim, we'll look at how to build layout components to house headers and footers, those familiar parts of a page that help give your app its overall shape. In the last Scrim, we talked about how Vue components are all about functionality, not just file types. And now it's time to put that into action and have a look at layout components. Layout components, or sometimes called structural components, can be headers, footers, sidebars, etc. Essentially, the elements that give your app its structure and help shape the user's experience. They don't usually have much complex logic, but they play a big role in how everything fits together. If we have a look at a pretty standard HTML structure, we can already see the UI in logical pieces. There's a header, a main, and a footer, but that just handles the HTML. With Vue Components, we can compartmentalize the logic, the styling, and the content for each of these parts. Our file could actually look more like this. Let's see it in action. Here, we've got our super simple component from before. We can see in the template that there are 3 distinct layout sections. There's the header, the main, and the footer. And each of these can be abstracted away into its own component and make our app.vue component super clean. Let me show you this using the header, and then you can have a go at the main and footer sections. So first, I'm going to come over here to our source folder and create a new folder called Components. And as the name suggests, this folder is going to hold a bunch of Vue components. Inside of it, I'm going to create a new file called header.vue. The naming convention for a Vue component is a capitalized word .vue. And now we've got an empty header component file. Remember, we're using the single file component file format, so we'll need to supply the 3 blocks of code for the script, template, and styles. So first the script, making sure to include the setup keyword, and then the template. And finally, the styles, making sure to include the scoped keyword. Now the scoped keyword is pretty self-explanatory. Everything that you see here in the styles block is scoped to only this specific component. This makes it a lot easier to target elements without having to specify a bunch of parents just to target one specific element. And now we've got that very familiar component skeleton. Get used to doing this. You'll be doing it a lot throughout this course. Now I'm going to pull out the relevant code to create a header component from our app.vue file. First, I'm going to pull over any relevant JavaScript. The header element down here uses this emoji variable. So I'm going to grab that, come back here to header.vue, and I'm going to paste it in the header.vue's script section. And since we're using this ref function, we'll have to make sure to import it. So import ref from Vue. Now we're going to grab what goes inside of the template section, which is the HTML. So back in app.vue, we're going to grab the header in its entirety, and we'll bring it back here to header.vue and pop it inside of the template tags. And finally, the styles. Back in app.vue once again, we're going to come here to the style section, and we're going to grab the relevant styles for header, which is just this one. And again, we'll come back to header.vue and we'll pop it in its style section. I'm going to give header.vue a save, and then come back to app.vue and save this one as well. The header content has now disappeared from the preview, and that's to be expected because there's no more header-related code in app.vue. We now need to import the header component and use it. The import statement is pretty straightforward. Import header from @components header.vue. This first header refers to the name of the component. Earlier, we named the file header.vue. Not only does this name the file, but it also names the component, so be sure to follow naming conventions. And don't worry too much about this @ yet. We'll talk about it in the next scrim. So now that we've imported the header component, we can use it. Down here in the template section where we took out the header content, let's pop in header with a capital H, and then a self-closing tag. And now when we save, we can see that the header has reappeared in the preview. Now that I've done the header component, it's your turn to give it a go with the main and footer elements of the template. You'll just have to follow the same formula that I did, which I've laid out in 5 steps down here. So your challenge is to separate the main and footer elements into the main and footer components and use them in app.vue. Remember that you can always refer to what I did with header as well. Here's how I went about turning the main and footer elements into components. So first, in the components folder, I'll create both files, so main.vue as well as footer.vue. And while I've got footer.vue open, I'm going to type out this single file component skeleton, which I'll speed up for your sake. And now that I've typed it once, I'm going to copy it and paste it in main.vue as well. And since I've got main.vue open, let's work on that first. Back in app.vue, I'm going to grab the main HTML and bring it over here to main.vue's template section. And then I'll do the same with the script section. Main.vue uses the name variable, So I'll head over to app.vue and I'll grab the name variable and bring it back to main.vue's script section. And since we have to use ref, we'll make sure to import it. Import ref from Vue. And then we'll fill out the style section. So back in app.vue, we'll come down to the style section and find the 2 rules relevant to main. We'll grab those and we'll come back to main.vue and we'll pop it in its style section. Now that main.vue is done, let's head to footer.vue. I'm going to grab the HTML first. So back in app.vue, I'm going to grab the footer section and bring it into footer.vue's template section. And then do the same with the script section. And we know that footer.vue uses this copyright year variable. So back in app.vue, we'll come up and we'll find the copyright year variable, grab it, and bring it over into the script section. And since we're using ref, we'll make sure to import it. Import ref from Vue. And finally, the styles. Back in app.vue, we'll come down and I'll grab the last CSS rule, which is for the footer, and bring it over to footer.vue's style section. And now both the main and footer components are ready. So back in app.vue, I'm first going to clean up. Now that I've given this a save, we can see that we only have the header in the preview. So let's import and use our remaining components. Import main from @components main.vue and import footer from @components footer.vue. And then to use it, we'll do the same as header. So main and footer. And since we're not using ref anymore in this script section, we can get rid of the import statement. And now when we save, everything is back to normal here in the browser preview. And there we have it, a clear app.vue component and 3 child components, header, main, and footer, each doing their own job. If we have a look at header.vue, you'll see that it's doing exactly what it's supposed to. It's defining what the header of the app looks like, says, and does. Like I said before, the component itself is the concern. Everything the app needs for the header component is right here. So what about app.vue? Well, app.vue has a single purpose too, and that's to bring together all the pieces. It's the top level component that lays out the structure of the page by pulling in its child components. And just like that, we've got a clean and organized layout, built entirely from focused and purposeful components. In the next scrim, we're going to take a step back from components and look at that character that we used when importing our child components. What is that? We'll find out in the next scrim. We saw in the last scrim that we used import statements to pull in the header, main, and footer components into the app component. We use this character as part of the file path, which is something you may not have seen before. You're probably more familiar with using something like this instead. This // is a path indicator that you're likely very familiar with. It means start from the current directory and then traverse from there. So technically, we can actually use the dot here in our import statements instead of @. In fact, let's do that. And then I'm going to run the app and we'll check it out. We can see that it absolutely still works, and that's because app.vue sits in the source directory, and we can navigate from here into components pretty easily. This works very well right now, but one day you're going to have a very complicated app, so relative traversing won't be much help then. So I'd like to introduce you to the @alias that's given to us by Vue, which, as you might remember, is the build tool that is utilized by Create Vue. Let's come on down here to vue.config.js, which we had a quick look at in the last section. This file essentially tells Vue how to work with our Vue project. There's quite a few things happening here, but we're just going to have a look at these 3 lines. This part of the code sets up an alias or a shortcut for our project. Specifically, it tells Vue, whenever you see this @ symbol in the code, replace it with the absolute file path to the source folder. This @ is the alias. This new URL section creates a URL to the source folder of our project, and this file URL to path converts that URL into a file path. So in a nutshell, the @alias takes us back to the source folder from wherever we are at, and then we can traverse from there. So back in the app.vue, let's do a tiny teeny challenge for you to get used to the character. Use the @alias to import all components. Super simple, and you'll probably do this in a matter of seconds, so go for it. Let's amend all of these relative file paths so they use the @alias instead. First one, second one, and the third one. And when we save, nothing has changed. So while it does do the exact same thing for us right now, the @alias will come into play later on when we're linking and importing assets. So now that we've learned a bit about components, how they're structured, and how they fit together, let's apply some of our newfound knowledge to a guided challenge. We'll start that in the next scrim. I'll see you there. Welcome to part 1 of a guided challenge. Here I'll walk you through the idea of Vue Components in a more real-world setting, helping you get comfortable with using a new concept in context. Think of it as a mix between a tutorial and a challenge. By the end of this guided challenge, which is actually next scrim, you'll be all set for your first go at the section project, our Vue Facts app. We start off with a completely empty project. Well, almost empty. Your first challenge, which is here in challenge.md, is to spin up a new Vue project using the Create Vue tool. See if you can remember how to spin up a new Vue project. Alright, let's spin up a new Vue project using the Create Vue tool. Down here in the terminal, let's type npm create Vue at latest. I will install Create Vue, yes. And for the project name, we wanted to scaffold to this directory, so I'll just put a dot. Let's remove the existing files with yes. Our package name will be Vue Project, and we will skip any and all additional features. And done! Now there are a few tweaks for us to do in order to make life easier for us, especially at this point in our learning journey. So first, over here in vite.config, we're going to remove any references to Vue dev tools, here and here. We won't be needing that for a while, and it might actually get in the way. Up here in the source folder, we're going to delete the components folder. We'll be creating our own anyway. In the assets folder, we're going to delete base.css as well as the SVG. And inside of main.css, we're going to cut everything because we have our own CSS. Then over to app.vue, we'll delete all the content inside of our 3 blocks. And now we've got a very basic Vue app ready for us to populate. And we'll get ready for that by installing it and running it. But what are we populating this app with? For this challenge, we're going to be turning a plain HTML and CSS mockup into a Vue app. I have just uploaded this new folder called OG Mockup. Inside of it, you'll find index.html and styles.css, as well as a picture of the mockup. The mockup is pretty simple, and it doesn't work as expected yet. As a Vue developer, you'll often be given HTML and CSS mockups in order to turn into a Vue app so it can be given the required functionality. So our job right now is to bring over the relevant code into the Vue app and split things into structural components. To help us out, I've already decided how we're going to split this UI structurally. The header up here, the main in the middle, and the footer at the bottom. If we have a look at the index.html file, we can already see that the body is split up this way: the header, the main, and the footer. And if you have a look at the mockup's CSS file, we can already see that this is also split up into those functional components: the header CSS, the main CSS, and all the way down here, the footer CSS. There is also this base CSS section up the top, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, it's time to give it a go. Your next challenge should feel familiar to the last challenge you had, except you have to grab code from the mockup rather than app.vue. So over here in app.vue, I'm going to pop your challenge up here in this script section. Create, populate, import, and use the header component in app.vue. Make sure you grab the relevant HTML and CSS from this mockup folder. This is how I went about it. First, in the source folder, I created the components folder. And inside of it, I created header.vue. Then of course I provided the single file component structure of script, template, and style. And I will speed through this one for your sake. Now it's time to grab code from our provided mockup. So first, in the mockup's index.html, I grabbed the header. And I popped it over here in header.vue's template section. Then I headed over to the mockup's style.css, and I grabbed the header styles. And then of course popped it over here in the header style section. Now that I have that, I headed over to app.vue to import the header with import header from components, header.vue, and then I used it in the template with header and then a closing tag. And now when I save, you might not actually be able to see it, but the words quote generator is here in the preview. It's just very, very light. And that's because a lot of the core CSS is missing, because we haven't set the core CSS yet. But this scrim is getting a little bit long, so we'll handle that as well as our remaining components in the next scrim. In the last scrim, part 1 of this challenge, we handled the header component. Now, even though we have the header handled, we can't actually really see the header at all, and that's because we haven't handled the base styling. To do that, we're going to hop on over here to the mockups style.css file and have a look at this first section where it says base CSS. We have a couple of CSS rules which look like will fix our styling issues. So let's grab these and pop them where? We can't just put them into app.vue. I mean, we can, but it's not going to do anything. Style scoped means it will only be applied to this specific component. This selector will select everything here, but that's just the header. And this body selector has nothing to select. And this app selector also doesn't have anything to select. So let's get rid of that. So where do we put it? Let's turn our attention over here to main.js. This is a file that we met at the end of the last section. It's where our Vue app is created and then mounted to the HTML. But it's also where we're importing a certain CSS file, which lives in the assets folder as main.css. And this is where we're going to put our base CSS styling. So with that knowledge, I'm going to challenge you to do it. Can you apply the mockup's base styles to the Vue app? Let's apply these base styles. So over here in the mockups style.css, we'll grab the styles again. And this time we'll head over here to source, assets, main.css, and we'll pop it in here instead. And now when we save, we can see that this is a lot closer to what we're aiming for. Now that we've handled the base CSS, we're going to move on to the footer component. And we're going to go straight into a challenge, one that I'm sure you'll smash pretty quickly. So I'm going to drop your challenge text here in app.vue. You're going to create, populate, import, and use the footer component. You've done this kind of thing a few times now, so it should feel pretty comfortable. So give it a go, and I'll see you in a bit. Okay, let's get that footer component happening. So over here in components, let's create the new file and call it footer.vue. And of course, we have to type out the single file component skeleton, which I will do and speed up. Man, I wish I typed that fast. Now I'm going to head into the mockups index.html file and grab the footer element. And then of course, I'll put it over here in footer.vue's template section. And then I'll do the same with the CSS. So mockup CSS all the way down here at the bottom, we'll grab both footer related CSS rules and we'll pop it here in footer.vue's style section. Now that the component is ready, let's head back to app.vue and we're going to import footer from @components footer.vue. And then we'll put it right here after the header. And once we save, we can see created by Professor Pickle pop up in the preview. Easy peasy. Now there is one learning point that I want to bring up here, and it's within the footer's style section. Our second rule targets any span elements that are children of footer elements. Now this definitely makes sense to do when we're part of a larger CSS file. If we have a look at the mockups CSS file again, we can see that there's a span in the footer, but also a span in the main section, and they do look quite different. So of course, in our CSS file, we'll want to specify the parent. But in a contained component like our footer, there is and will only be one kind of span, which is this one. As such, we can actually take away the parent selector of footer and just leave the span. And we can already see how this can lead to very clean and readable code. I mean, how many times have you seen a crazy long CSS selector like this? Of course, this won't actually happen much. I'm really over-exaggerating here. But a long CSS selector like this could be as simple as the second one here at the bottom when in the context of a component. Okay, back to our app. Now that we've got the footer, it's time to tackle the biggest and final part, the main component. And here comes your final challenge. Create, populate, import, and use the main component. Take advantage of scope styles and clean up the CSS selectors as you see fit. Let's go through those steps that you're no doubt super familiar with by now. So in components, we'll create main.vue and we'll set up the single file component skeleton. We have that now, so I'm going to come over here to index.html and grab the main section in its entirety and pop it here in the template section. And then of course, over here to styles.css for the CSS, of which there is quite a lot, so make sure you grab everything that is relevant. And then we'll pop it here in the style scoped section. Now there's a lot of cleanup that we can do here. Not this one, because this one is the selector. But we can clean up every single other main that is here. And now our main component is ready to import. So back in app.vue, we're going to import main from components main.vue. And down here, we'll squeeze it in between header and footer. And there we go. It's looking great, and the preview looks just like the mockup. So your first guided challenge is now complete. You've created a Vue app from scratch using Create Vue. We've also tweaked the Vite settings to remove Vue DevTools and clean up files and code that we don't need. You've also created and used 3 components based on a HTML and CSS mockup, and you've cleaned up the CSS to take advantage of scoped styles. Most of these things you'll need to do for the upcoming Scrim, where you're going to start our Section 2 project. So take a quick break, pat yourself on the back, and I'll see you there. Welcome to your Section 2 project. This is the Vue Facts app. Just like with your last challenge, you'll be given a HTML and CSS mockup to turn into a Vue app. Here in the editor, I've already set up the Vue project, disabled Vue DevTools, and pulled the codebase down to the bare necessities. Up here in the OG Vue Facts folder, I've provided the mockups HTML, CSS, as well as a reference image for you. Now you will notice that I have provided the Vue logo image file as well, but we won't be needing this until much later in the section. In fact, if we have a look at the HTML, you can see that I've commented out the image tag, and that's because it will very likely break the app until we learn how to handle images properly. This is the first of 3 scrims for this project. We're going to work on simply splitting the mockup into logical components, just like what we've done so far in the section. The layout and content of the mockup may differ slightly from what you've seen before, but try to think logically and work through it. After all, in the real world, not everything will be as clear-cut as these challenges. So back in the editor, let's close this up, and I will take you to app.vue, where I'm going to drop your challenge text. Turn the provided HTML and CSS mockup into a Vue app that uses 3 components, and make sure you use all the provided CSS. Remember that you can always refer back to previous scrims to go over what we did. So I will see you on the other side with the solution. So first, I'm going to run the app with npm install and npm run dev, so we can see ourselves working in it in real time. Then I'm going to create our components folder here in the source directory, so components. And inside of it, I'm going to create our 3 component files, starting with header, main, and finally footer. And now that I've typed that once, I'm going to copy and paste it into the others, into header and into main. Then I'm going to pull over all the HTML. So over here in the Vue Facts index.html file, I'm going to pull over first the header into the header template, and then the entire main section, which is quite large, into the main template section. And then back in index.html, I will grab the footer section and pop it into the footer template area. Then I'm going to do the same with the CSS. So I'll close up the HTML and open up the CSS. And scrolling down, I will find the header CSS section. I'll grab all of these and pop it into the header style scoped section. And I will clean up these parent selectors because we don't need them, thanks to the scoped keyword. Next up is the main CSS. We'll grab all of these and pop them into the main CSS scope section. And I will get rid of this main, and this main parent selectors. And then finally, down here, we'll grab the footer CSS and pop it over here in the footer style section. And I'll get rid of this footer parent selector. Okay, now that our components are ready, we can come back to app.vue and import them. So import header from at components header.vue. Same thing with the main from at components main.vue, and then import footer from at components footer.vue. Then we can use them in the template. So header first, main second, and footer last. And now when we save, we can see that the content is there, but we're missing the base CSS. So here in the CSS file, we will grab the entire base CSS section to this span, and then we'll pop this in source assets main.css. And now when we save, we can see that our app is looking just like the mockup, minus the logo, which we know that we've commented out at this stage. So nice job! You've made a fantastic start to the Section 2 project. You've taken a plain HTML and CSS mockup and you split it into structural components in a brand new Vue app. We're off to a great start, and now it's time to learn a bit more about Vue foundations so we can add even more to this project. Next up, we're going to dig into another very core feature of Vue, which is reactivity. I'll see you there. Welcome back from dipping your toes into our Section 2 project. You've done the first step in that project, and now we're going to learn something new, reactivity. Now, the word reactivity or reactive is something you might have heard a few times already, and this ref function should also look familiar. You've already counted a bit of reactivity and ref in Section 1, but now we're really going to dig in. First, what is a reactive state? When something is made reactive in Vue, like a variable, Vue watches it. If the value of a reactive variable changes, like this, Vue will automatically re-render parts of the UI as needed. Vue's reactivity system is what makes it feel so live and automatic. You don't need to write code to manually update the DOM. Vue does that for you as long as this variable has reactive state. And to create reactive state for a variable, we use the ref function, which you have seen a few times now. We declare a constant using const, we name the variable as usual, and then we wrap our intended value with the ref function. And now, this name variable is reactive. Let's see it in action. Here we've got a pretty familiar Vue app, which I'm going to run so we can see it. This is the quote generator we worked on earlier. There are a few elements in this app that would definitely benefit from reactive state, and that is the quote as well as the author of the quote. In a more developed version of this app, we might be pulling in data from an array or an external source like an API. So our Vue app should expect that functionality in the future. Let's head into the main component, where the quote and the author are housed. And now it's time to utilize this script section. This is where we set up our reactive variables. So first, because we're going to be using ref, we have to import it. To import ref from Vue. And then I can use it to create a reactive variable for the quote. So const quote equals ref, and I'm just going to copy and paste what we have at the moment. This quote variable is now what we call a ref object. This is a special object that helps Vue keep track of the reactive states in the app. These are often called refs. So if you hear me say something like the quote ref, you'll know that I'm referring to a variable that has been made reactive using the ref function. Okay, it's your turn to give it a go. Here is a mini one-liner challenge. Create a reactive variable to house the author, John Johnson. This is just a quick one. You can basically do exactly what I did up here, but with the author instead. Const author equals ref John Johnson. Pretty easy. Now, for the sake of practice, let's see what else we can make reactive. Over here in the footer component, we have the copyright year. While this isn't going to change much, it would certainly change based on the current year. So this is a good contender here. And then over here in the header.vue component, we've only got the quote generator heading. Now this probably won't change much in a real app setting, but let's get some practice in anyway. I'm going to pop your challenge over here in the header component, which is to create a reactive variable to house the heading here. And then in footer.vue, you'll do the same to house the current year. Let's create some refs. So here in header.vue, I'm going to first import ref so we can use it. Then let's create a new variable. I'm going to call it title, and then we'll use ref, and we'll just call it the same thing as it is right now, quote generator. And then in footer.vue, we're going to do the same thing, starting with importing ref from Vue, and then we'll create the year variable. So const year equals ref, and we'll do the same thing right now, 2025. Great. We've set up some refs, or reactive variables. But now what? You might remember from section 1 what we have to do now to get these to render in our template. And you're welcome to give it a go after the scrim has ended. But we will have a look at that properly in the next scrim. So I will see you there. We're going to have a look at something called template syntax in the scrim, specifically text interpolation. We've got our reactive variables here in our little quote generator app like this year. Vue is now watching these variables, but we now need Vue to actually render them to the page. Let's get set up by running the app with npm install and npm run dev. Vue uses a HTML-based syntax that lets us bind data, such as refs, in our components to certain elements of the DOM. You've actually already seen text interpolation in action back in section 1 with this mustache syntax. This is how we can render a ref that we've specified in our component. Let's see it in action. We're going to head on over here to the header component. We've got a title ref here with the value of quote generator. It's a little different from the hard-coded heading that we have down here, which has a lowercase g. In order to use our title ref in the template section, all we have to do is specify the ref name wrapped in curly brackets. So instead of quote generator being hard-coded, we're going to pop in some mustache syntax, and we're going to type in title. Now when we save, we can see that our title ref is being used. We can see the capital G this time. And to make it super obvious, let's change this to something completely different, like programming quotes. And we can see that it has changed. Now the way that I just changed this variable's value like this isn't how we would actually do something programmatically in a real app setting. In a real app, we would actually be tapping into the value property of the title ref. Title.value equals programming quotes. And we'll change this back to what it was before, which was quote generator. Because title is technically a ref object, we have to specify the .value property in order to actually change its value. But it's just title down here in the template. What gives? Well, Vue automatically unwraps the .value property for us when we use refs inside of the template. So while we have to write title.value up here in our JavaScript code, we can just write title in the template and Vue knows to display the inner value. This makes our templates a lot cleaner and a lot easier to read, without needing to worry about adding .value all over the place. Alright, now it's over to you. There are a few refs that we created in the last section that we can render in their components template section. There is one here in footer, and there's two here in main.vue. So here is your challenge, which I will pop here in main.vue. Render the quote and author refs in the template, and then in footer.vue, do the same with the year ref, and then change the value of each ref using .value. Let's render some refs. Here in the main component, let's get rid of this hard-coded quote, and then we'll replace it with mustache syntax and quote. And you can see a very slight difference because the full stop has disappeared. And then instead of the hard-coded John Johnson, let's do some mustache syntax, and then here we'll use author. Next is to change the property of each ref. So quote.value, I changed this to it's a feature, not a bug. And then for author.value, I changed this to unknown. Then let's do the same over here in the footer. So instead of this hard-coded 2025, we're going to pop in some mustache syntax and then refer to the year ref. And then up here, after year has been created, we're going to target it and its value, and we'll change this to 2014, which is the year that Vue was publicly released. And there we go. One quick note here. Even though we've only used strings for our refs, we can actually use a whole bunch of types. Strings, booleans, numbers, and arrays, just to name a few. Just make sure you're using quotation marks when you need, especially for strings. And just like that, our app is starting to feel a lot more dynamic and reactive. Thanks to refs, we're now using reactive state and text interpolation to render data that updates in real time. Instead of hard-coding content, we're letting Vue handle changes behind the scenes, and our template reflects those changes instantly. Now, text interpolation is only one of many ways to bind component data to the component template. We're going to check out another method in the next scrim. I'll see you there. So far, we've only seen text interpolation used to bind refs to elements in the template, but there are cases where the mustache syntax can't be used at all. And one such instance is when we need to dynamically populate a HTML attribute value. So for example, I'm going to create a new ref that holds a link, const href equals ref. And here I'm just going to paste in the Scrimba URL. And then I'm going to set up some anchor tags around this span element down here. So anchor tag, empty href for now, and then we'll make sure to close it as well. Now you might think that we can just pop some text interpolation here in the value of the href attribute like this. But this would actually just set up an anchor tag with the href attribute of bracket bracket href bracket bracket. And that's not what we want at all. And that is where attribute bindings come into play. This helps us, as the name suggests, bind data to HTML attributes. In our case, we want to bind this href ref to the href attribute of our new anchor tag. Vue gives us what's called the vbind directive. It's something we can attach to HTML attributes when we want Vue to take control of them. Instead of treating the attribute as plain static text, Vue steps in and does a bit of magic. What sort of magic? Let's have a look. So first we're going to get rid of this because it's not correct anyway. Then we're going to prepend this v-bind colon to this href attribute. Now this href attribute is data bound. But data bound to what? Well, it will be data bound to whatever we specify as the value here. We want to use this href ref that we created up here. So all we have to do is to provide href as the value of this href attribute. And that's it. We can see that the anchor tag down here is definitely in play because of that default blue styling. And speaking of the default blue styling, it's not very nice. So I'm going to quickly fix this up. Down here in the styles, I'm going to add a new rule, anchor tags, and I'm going to make them all white. And that feels much better. That was a bit of a tangent, but did you see how quick that was? We didn't have to go into an external CSS file, find the footer styles, and then add to it. Thanks to scope styles, we were able to do that right here super quick. Over here in main.vue, we're going to add another link. We would potentially want users to be able to click out to the source of the quote that they're seeing. So perhaps the author over here could be an anchor tag as well. So here is your challenge up here in the script section. Turn the static author name into a dynamic link. And to do that, I've given you 4 steps. Let's link up this author. So first up here, I created the ref. I called it const href equals ref, and I used the Wikipedia link that I provided. And then I came down to the span tag and I wrapped it in anchor tags. A href, and then of course to close it with a. Then I used vbind to bind this href attribute. So vbind colon. And as the value, I provided the href ref with just href. And now we can see that something has happened. Unknown is definitely a link already because we can see the default blue underline. But the styling has gone a little bit funny. And that's because we now have this a tag as a child of the section rather than the span tag. Let's fix that really quickly. Coming down here to the CSS, the fastest way I could find to do this was to add to this span. I just added an anchor selector. But you could have approached it completely differently. Such is the joy of CSS. And there we go. We've learnt about attribute bindings and used its syntax, the vbind, to do it. Now, vbind is only one of many Vue directives that exist. We'll talk about directives a little more later in the course. But just know you've learnt your first one, so hats off to you. Next up, I'm going to introduce you to a few more fun things about vbind to make your dev life a little more streamlined. I'll catch you there. So we've just learnt how to bind attributes using vbind, but there are a few more fun things to know about vbind. Here we have our quote generator app again, but I've made a few tiny changes to get it ready for what we're about to learn. Over here, I've added another button to share the quote, and I fixed up the structure a little bit as well as add some styling. The first extra thing to know about vbind is that it works with Boolean attributes. Attributes like disabled, for example. As long as the value of the ref that we're feeding it is a Boolean, it will action accordingly. In the case down here, the disabled attribute will be false, and therefore the button will not be disabled. Let's actually see it in action. As I said earlier, we have 2 buttons now, and one of them is to share the quote. Well, that's definitely not ready right now, so let's disable it by using a ref and attribute binding. So up here in the JavaScript, I'm going to create a new ref. Const is button disabled equals ref and true. Now here I made sure not to use quotation marks so that this value is a Boolean. And then I can bind it to the share button like this. vbind colon disabled equals is button disabled. And now you can see the button is disabled. Now just a quick note, I did come down here and add some disabled CSS, and that's why it's showing up gray and a little bit faded. You can give it a go now with the other button. Here is your super straightforward challenge. Use the is button disabled ref to disable the another button. Let's do it. It's exactly the same as what we did for the share button, but the is button disabled ref has already been created. So we just have to come straight down here to the button and add vbind : disabled equals is button disabled. Easy peasy. The other super cool thing about vbind and most other directors that you'll come across is that they have shorthands. Instead of using vbind : we can actually just use colon. Think of all the time you'll save by skipping those 6 characters all throughout your project. So over here in footer.vue, where we have our vbind : href, this can literally just be href, and it will do the exact same thing. Back here in main.vue, I'm going to give you a challenge to clean up some of the vbinds that we have here. Use vbinds shorthand wherever possible. There are a couple of places, so see if you can find them all. Okay, let's do it. There are 3 vbinds here that we can shorten to use the shorthand. So vbind here, we'll get rid of it, vbind here, and also vbind here. And there we go. Look how much cleaner our code is now. And if you think that was cool, wait till you see the next one. If your attribute name is the same as the value that you're passing it, like in this example, you can remove the equal sign and value completely. You can just use href. This is aptly named the same name shorthand. So for example, our href here that links out to the source of the quote, we're binding the href attribute with a ref called href. So this whole attribute binding situation can just be shorthanded to just href. And this will still work just as well. And now it's your turn to give it a go over here in footer.vue. Here we also have a href attribute that is bound to a href ref. So can you use the same name shorthand to shorten the href attribute binding? Let's do it. We're going to grab everything past this equal sign and leave just href. And now you know. You've got a solid handle on vbind, its shorthands, and even a neat trick for when the attribute name matches the ref. In the next scrim, we're going to pull together everything you've learned so far about reactivity and template syntax and start building it into our Section 2 project. I'll see you there. Welcome back to the Section 2 project, our Vue Facts app. In this scrim, you'll tackle the second part of the project, which is reactivity and template syntax. You're going to pull together everything you've learned about reactivity, reactive state, refs, text interpolation, and attribute bindings to take this project to the next stage. You'll have a few challenges to work through in this scrim. Let's start with the footer component. We need to create a ref that houses this hard-coded URL, and then use that ref instead of this hard-coded URL. So here is your challenge text. Create a ref to house the Vue website, and then bind the ref to our anchor tag's href attribute, and use shorthands if you can. First, we're going to have to import ref from Vue so that we can use it, and then we can create one. I'm going to call it href and have it equals to ref and then the Vue website. And now that I have it, we're going to bind it to our anchor tag's href attribute. So instead of the hard-coded URL here, I'm going to provide href, which is the name of the ref. And then of course, I'll have to bind it with vbind : And now we can see that there's a few opportunities to shorthand. First, we can shorthand vbind : to just : and then because the name of the attribute and the name of the ref are the same, we can remove everything past this equal sign as well, leaving just href. Great job. Let's move into main.vue for your second challenge. Here we have 3 section elements that each render a different Vue fact. Each one has a h2 that contains an adjective, and then a paragraph element containing a short description of that adjective. There is a lot of variable content for us to play with. For this challenge, I want to push you a little bit and ask you to try something that we haven't covered, but it is a combination of your existing JavaScript knowledge and Vue. Let's see if you can figure out how to use an array of objects as a ref. Your challenge is to create a reactive array of objects to house the Vue facts. Each object might have an adjective property and a description property. This is almost exactly the same way that you would create an array of objects in vanilla JavaScript. But here, you'll just have to wrap it in the ref function. Give it a go. Okay, so just like always, let's import ref from Vue so we can use it. And now we can use it to create this new reactive array of objects. And I'm going to call it facts. and then start the ref function. Now I know that it's going to be an array, so I'll pop that in first. I also know that each array element is going to be an object, so I'll create one object first. The first property is going to be adjective, and I'll leave it blank for now. And the second one is going to be description, and again, I'll leave it blank for now. I also know that there's only going to be 3 of them, so I'm going to preemptively create 3 of these matching objects. And then I'm going to grab this hard-coded data and pop it into the facts ref. So first lightweight and its description, and then approachable and then its description, and then finally versatile and then its description. Like I said before, this is just like creating a vanilla array of objects. The only difference is that we wrapped it in Vue's ref function to make it reactive. Now all we have left to do is bind the data from up here to the elements in our array down here. For this, you will have to draw upon your existing knowledge of JavaScript arrays and objects, and then combine it with our new knowledge of text interpolation using the mustache syntax. So here is your final challenge. Bind the data from the facts ref to elements in the template. Remember that facts is an array, and each element of that array is an object with properties. How did you go marrying up your existing JavaScript knowledge with new Vue knowledge? Here's how we can go about it. So I'm going to start with this lightweight adjective. Instead of the hard-coded lightweight, I'm going to pop in some mustache syntax. And then I started off with the ref itself, which is facts. I want to target the first element of the array, so I popped in these square brackets and inside of it, index 0. Now that I'm in the index 0 object, I want to grab the adjective property, so I just popped in .adjective. And then we just have to do a very similar thing for the description. So first the mustache syntax, and we want facts and the element at index 0. And then we're targeting the description property. Now you're not going to see a difference over here in the preview because we've just used exactly the same content as the hard-coded version. But now we're going to see something in action. I'm now going to delete the second and third sections and leave only the first. And then I'm going to copy and paste this section twice. And now we can see that this text interpolation is definitely working. And now it's just a matter of changing the indices of the second and third one. So the second one should be index 1 and index 1, and the third one is index 2 and index 2. And there we go. Now some of you might be thinking, wait, there's a more streamlined way of doing this, right? What's with all the copying and pasting? And you'd be absolutely right. But hold your horses, we'll get to that in a later section. All in good time. But nice work. Your developer senses are definitely tingling. We've now split the app into logical components and played around with reactive state, text interpolation, and attribute binding. In a real app, this kind of data would probably come from an external source, like an API. So it makes sense to practice how to get that data from your JavaScript into the rendered HTML. There's just one thing left to do before our project really matches the mockup, and that's adding the image. The next few scrims will focus on how to work with images in Vue, and then we'll wrap up this section by bringing the Vue logo into the project. What is a web app without images? Even the simplest of apps has an image somewhere, whether it's a little logo or a feature image. There are actually a few ways to work with images and assets in Vue, and they're all valid methods depending on the complexity of your usage. The first method is to use an absolute path to reference a file in the public folder. A Vue project's public folder is a special directory for static assets. These files are served to the client as is, meaning they don't go through Vue's bundling process and don't get optimized. Any file in the public folder can be accessed directly via the root /URL. Here I've got a small Vue app that's designed to display images. There are 3 sections and each will house 2 images, one that I'll hook up and the other that you'll hook up. We're going to start in this first section where it says absolute path to public folder to showcase the absolute path to the public folder. I'm going to create an empty image tag. So image, source, and we'll leave it blank for now, and then also alt, and we'll leave it blank for now. Now let's check out what's in the public folder. We've got a folder called images, and then inside of it we have 2 JPEGs. There's catmeme1A and catmeme1B. Let's use the first one, this A. Back to our image tag, we're going to link it directly to the source in the public folder like this. / to take us to the public folder, images to take us into that folder, and then we'll target the image name. So cat meme1_a.jpg. And there we have our first image, straight out of the public folder. Okay, it's your turn to give it a go with the other image that we have in that folder. Use an image tag to display catmeme1b.jpg, located in the public folder. Alright, let's do exactly the same thing as before, but now using the B image. So image, source, slash to take us to the public folder, images to take us into that folder, and then cat meme1b.jpg. And we'll do an empty alt for now. And there it is. The next way is to use a relative path to the assets folder. It's pretty similar to the first method, but we're using the assets folder instead. You might remember from previous scrims or even this one that there is an assets folder that sits inside of our source folder right here. This is where our main.css is living, and it's also where other assets like images can live as well. To get here, we can use the super duper dandy @alias to take us to the source folder and then into the assets folder. I'm going to get rid of this challenge text, and we can move on down to this second section where it says relative path to the assets folder. Just like before, let's create an empty image tag with an empty source and an empty alt. And now let's check out that assets folder to see what we have. We've got an images folder that holds catmeme2a, catmeme2b, catmeme3a, and catmeme3b. We're going to use catmeme2a for this example. So over here in source, we're going to use the @alias to take us to the source folder, and then into assets, and then into images, and we're going to use catmeme2_a.jpg. And there we have half of our second cat meme. And now it's up to you to get that second half up. Use an image tag to display catmeme2b.jpg, located in the source assets folder. Okay, let's finish this meme with image, source. We'll start with the @alias to take us to the source folder, and then into the assets folder, into the images folder, and then we'll target catmeme2b.jpg with an empty alt for now. And there he is in all his glory. The third method that we'll look at in this scrim is to import the asset into the component and then use it via attribute binding. This method involves importing it from the assets folder and then binding it to an image's source attribute. In this final section here where it says import asset into component, I'm going to once again start with an empty image tag. Image, source, empty, and alt, empty. But now I'm going to head up to the script section and I'm going to import our image, specifically catmeme3a. So import catmeme3a from assets, images, catmeme3_a.jpg. Now we can name this import whatever we want, but this name makes sense. And now we can come down to our image tag and bind our import to the source property. So first I'm going to bind with vbind:, and then the source is catmeme3_a, referring to this import up here. And there it is. You can probably guess what's coming next. It is your turn to finish this very recognizable cat meme. At least I hope it's recognizable. I'm not old, am I? Import catmeme3b into the component, and then use an image tag and attribute binding to display it. Let's do it. I'm going to first come up here and import the image first. So import catmeme3b from assets, images, catmeme3b.jpg. And then I'm going to come back down here and I'm going to write everything in one go with image vbind source equals catmeme3b with an empty alt. And there it is. Of course, we can make use of the vbind shorthand by removing this vbind completely and leaving just :source. And if the import did have the same name as the attribute, which is source, let's change it just to see that in action. We can remove everything past this, leaving just :source. At the end of the day, the method you choose depends on your project's needs and the conditions you're working with. Each approach has its strengths and trade-offs, so there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Here's a quick table to help you decide. Feel free to take a quick screenshot if you want it for future reference. In the next scrim, we're going to have a bit of a play around with these three methods and which one you should use in different situations. It's time to put what you've learned in the last scrim into practice. In this challenge, you'll be working with images in a Vue project using the three methods that we just explored. Here is that same table from the end of the last scrim for reference. And just a quick note, there are actually more ways to work with assets and images in Vue, and these are just the first three to get you started. Also, keep in mind that this table is meant as a general guide, not a rulebook. You might find that one method works better for your particular situation. So here is your challenge. I've set up a single page from an e-commerce site. Over here in OG Assets, I've provided 3 images as well as a mock-up of what the final app should look like. This header logo up here is logo.png. This product image is productimage.jpg, and down here we have a white version of the logo called logo footer 35pixels.png. We can see from the preview that there are no images involved just yet, and that is your challenge for this scrim. Over here in header, I've marked out where you'll have to pop in an image tag for the logo. And same goes for main.vue, where I would like you to put the product image. And of course, down here in footer.vue, I've marked out where I would like that white version of the logo. Here I've got a file called challenge.markdown, where I've popped the entire challenge as a quick reference. And speaking of reference, I've also put a quick reminder of the best use cases of the 3 methods that we learnt in the last scrim. So good luck, and I'll catch you on the other side. How did you go with this slightly larger challenge? Here's how I would have gone about it. But again, remember, the best use cases are general. You might have made different choices, and that's okay. At the end of the day, it really depends on your project and your context. So first, the logo here in header.vue. This is a relatively small asset, and it's used in the header. It's already quite small in size, and because there's only one of them, I don't need it to be optimized by Vue. So I'm going to use a relative link to the assets folder for this one. So first, I'm going to move logo.png into the assets folder. And then here, I'm going to create that image tag. So image, source, and to get to the assets folder, we'll use the @alias, and then into assets, and then logo.png. And for the alt, we'll call it logo. Next, I handled the product image over here in main.vue. Now, in the full context of the app, there will be multiple product images, and we might need them to load dynamically. So for this one, I'm going to practice importing the asset into the component. So just like before, I moved productimage.jpg into the assets folder. And then up here in the script section, I imported it, and I called it source from @assets productimage.jpg. And then, of course, I'll bind it to an image tag's source attribute. So image vbind source equals, and we've called it source up here, alt catbox. And you can probably see that there are a few shorthands that we can use here. We can shorten vbind : to just : and because source matches source, we can get rid of everything past this equal sign. And finally, the footer logo here in footer.vue. Now this one's definitely a contender for a relative link to the assets folder, but we haven't tried the public method yet, so we're going to do that here. So first, I'll move logo footer 35 pixels to the public folder, and then I'm going to use it in an image tag. So image, source, / to get straight into the public folder, and then logo, footer, 35 pixels.png, and for the alt, we'll call it white logo. And if you scroll down in the preview down to the footer, you'll see it there. And there we have it. You've just tried your hand at the 3 methods of handling images or assets. You've made a conscious decision regarding which method to use, and now you have another tool on your belt. We've only got a few scrims left. And next up, we're going to finalize our Section 2 project by adding that final image. I'll see you there. Welcome back to the Section 2 project. We're very, very close to completing it. There's just one more thing to go. As you can probably guess by now, we'll be tackling the third and final challenge of this project, which is the image. Over here in the header component, we're going to finally tackle this commented out bit of code. Now, based on your understanding of this super simple project, which method of using images would you use? Now, the logo file is available here in the OG Vue Facts folder under logo Vue 300 pixels. Grab it and place it wherever you see fit, and using your preferred method of working with images, get the logo showing. So I'm going to get rid of this and replace it with your challenge text, which is to render the Vue logo. This will be your last challenge for this entire section. So make it a good one, and I'll see you on the other side. How did you go, and what method did you pick? Let's pop in an empty image tag for now. Image, source, empty, and alt, Vue logo. Now, your solution could have been to use a relative path to the assets folder because of the simple nature of this project. The logo is very static and only used in one place and doesn't change. So you could have placed the logo in the assets folder like this, and then linked to it using a relative path like this, at assets, logo, Vue 300 pixels.png. And there it is. But you could also say that the image is already optimized because we can see that it is 300 pixels, and there's only one image across the entire project. So you might have gone with using the public folder and linked directly to it, like this. So we'll move this to the public folder, and then we'll change this to just /logo Vue 300 pixels. And there it still is. Or you could have thought that even if it's a small project, you want the image to be imported and optimized. Or you just want it to practice what you know is still coming in later sections. So you could have imported the image. So I'm going to move the logo back into the assets folder. And then up here in the script section, I'm going to import it from there. So import source from at assets logo Vue 300 pixels.png. And then we would have bound it to the image. So instead of all of this, it's just going to be source with a vbind before that. And of course, we can use all the shorthands known to man and get rid of the vbind, as well as the reference to source, because the attribute is the same. No matter what way you choose, these are all valid methods for different kinds of projects. As long as you're familiar with all three, you have all the tools you need on your tool belt. And with that, our first Vue project is complete. We have a very simple Vue app that displays 3 facts about Vue. It uses a parent component, app.vue, that imports 3 child components that make up the entire UI. Each component has separate logic, styling, and template from other components to keep the concerns separated, where the concern is the component itself. This project uses 2 different ways to bind data from the component's logic to the component's template. Here in main.vue, we've used text interpolation. And here in header.vue, we've used attribute binding. And it uses one of 3 different ways to work with images in a Vue project. Very well done. And that's it for this section. Give yourself a huge pat on the back. Let's take a moment to recap what you've learned so far. You've learned how to break your app into bite-sized logical pieces with Vue Components. And we've discovered how to simplify import paths with the @alias. You've also learned about Vue's reactivity system, which went hand in hand with Vue's template syntax. And finally, we looked at how to use images and assets in Vue. Not only that, but you've also built your very first Vue app, which is our Vue Facts app. How good is that? Getting all of this under your belt means you're well on your way to becoming confident with Vue. It might have felt like a lot at times, but every bit that you've tackled here is laying a strong foundation for what's to come. In the next section, we're going to start making our Vue apps smarter, passing data around, responding to user input, and showing just the right things at just the right time. I will see you there.